Welcome back to Collegiate Sports Connect. I'm joined today by Andy Wittry, NIL and sports business reporter for On3, to talk about this rise in player-led NIL collectives. Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, Steph. Happy to be here.
Well, we love your reporting, Andy. We always include you in D1 Ticker, and I'm so excited to talk about this because there are so many of these player-led collectives. I am thinking about the Twin Cities Collective for Minnesota, East Lansing for Michigan State, Iowa City for Iowa. What is really unique about this model of NIL collective?
I think it's a scale, Steph. The fact that, I went to East Lansing and talked to one of the 6-year seniors in the team right now. We still have 6-year seniors in college football. So I talked to right guard Matt Carrick, and he told me that at the time they had 105 or so players who had opted in to join this club. So basically almost the entire team, right? And so to see all the players kind of come together, each player under this Yoke model, they get the same share of the revenue. At the time, Yoke had a platform fee of about 25%. Yoke CEO Mick Assoff told me that, based on the scale and how they've increased their scale, it's since gone down to 18%. And so the players are now receiving a larger share collectively. So really, it's just, I think, the scale, the number of players, and the number of, as we've seen these clubs pop up, is that, it's pushing 15 to 20. And, Assoff told me back on July 21st, he said within the month or within, 30 days or so, we might see the first non-FBS NIL club pop up. So he was saying that based on their technology, he thinks that this can support really athletes at any level and in any sport. So obviously the Power 5 football programs are the headlines when you have an Auburn or a Tennessee pop up. But certainly if we see maybe a volleyball club or a baseball or softball, I think that could be the next step too for Yoke.
Well, that's my question. Is it a misnomer to say that this is player-led if these groups are being supported by Yoke's technologies and platforms?
I think so, and that's not to diminish what Yoke is doing. I don't think that's Yoke's problem. I think it's maybe just it's people in the ecosystem as we're still, learning the new terminology and how to describe these different groups. Is that when I write about collectives now, is that I've pretty much reached a point, Steph, where when I say collective, I think that there's not one agreed upon definition, right? Is that there's the 501c3s, or at least ones that have filed for it. They claim they are. We'll see what the IRS says. There's LLCs. There's now, these so-called player-led collectives. And so I think that you have groups that they say they're collective and they may not actually be a collective. You have ones that probably are, but say they aren't. So I think at this point, I just say it's a catch-all. It's an umbrella term. We kind of lump it all together. And I know that there's kind of the connotation. I know that, Mark Stoops at Kentucky, they have their own term where they said kind of, we're not a collective, or our program here at Kentucky, it's not a collective, it's this other thing. It's all language. It's, it's who says potato versus potato, right? It's all kind of the same thing. But I think you're right, is that, it is a misnomer to say it's player led. I think that Yoke's goal is that they want the players to be front facing, which maybe makes this unique. And that's why maybe at first people said that, oh, this is a player-led collective, or that it cut out the middleman, which, frankly, that's not true. And Yoke wouldn't claim that, right? They're saying that we provide the technology to allow players to build, paywalled communities. And so there certainly is a third party. It's Yoke. They just might be a little bit more in the background and want the players to basically, we give you the tools, whatever you guys want to make of it, like you have the chance now to go out and do that. So I do think it would be a misnomer, but that's no fault of Yoke, and that's no fault of the players. It's probably just us, in the media and fans. And, as this era is still, so new, we're starting year 2 here of the NCAA's NIL era. We still are learning, what's the language and the terminology around how to describe this stuff.
Well, let's talk a little bit more specific about what these collectives are offering. What's on the table? What's the model? Yoke originally started by offering NFTs, but now they're kind of switching to this access pass. Tell me what this model actually looks like. What are fans receiving for being part of it?
That's right. So, you mentioned the NFT component. There was Yoke Gaming for a while where, players and fans could play the same video game together, almost kind of like a Twitch, but a personal stream where you and your favorite player could play alongside each other. And so now these, player-driven membership communities is kind of the next step of part of their technology, right? Of offering more ways for players and fans to engage. And it offers both, digital access, so online, I think, message boards, Mick told me that the Zoom calls they've had between players and fans have been very popular. There was one last Friday, I know, between Michigan State players and Michigan State fans. And so there's the digital component, and there's also the in-person component. And this is where I think is really interesting to see which fans are actually interested in paying the money to join these fan clubs and get these access passes. Because when I went to East Lansing, I actually did probably 30 or 40 minutes of just, person on the street interviews of asking fans, have you heard about this? And if not, here's what the East Lansing NIL club is. Would you be interested? And almost to a person, it sounded like location, 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 where if you were close to East Lansing or within, say, a 2, 3, 4 hour radius where it's not unfeasible to drive to a Saturday home game, is that if you can come to those in-person events, fans said, yeah, it's worth it. But, when there was a couple that I saw, mid-30s walking down the heart of East Lansing, they had their matching, Michigan State caps on. And I assumed, okay, young 30s, probably Michigan State grads, would they join this? And then they politely explained very kindly in very thick German accents, well, we live pretty far away, so I don't think we would join because I live in Germany, right? But then Mick was telling me too, is it based on their tech? He was saying that he thinks that if there's so much value they can offer from a digital and online component, that even if you don't live in person, you don't live in East Lansing or you don't live in one of these college towns, there's still that incentive and that value that makes it worth it. But I think it remains to be seen, right? Of what's for each fan. What is your budget? What is your discretionary income? Do you go to every home game, or is it maybe one a year where we go back for homecoming or go back for the first home game of the season? So that's kind of that dichotomy of, do you want to be there for that one in-person meet and greet to meet the star quarterback or starting running back, or is it enough to say, hey, you know what? The Zoom calls are enough for me, the online message board. So it's a mixture of both, but it seems like the in-person ones, I would assume as a fan, that provides the most value to go to some private tailgate before you play your rival, or the chance to meet, the starting quarterback.
Well, I think Yoke needs to partner with Meta, get into the metaverse so folks can do some virtual reality meet and greets. That might solve the problem for some of those German fans. You mentioned for the East Lansing Club that there's a really healthy participation numbers across the board, but we are seeing some players. I'm thinking about Riley Moss at Iowa, who's opting out of the Iowa City NIL Club. What are these collectives the answer to the criticism early in NIL of, oh, this is going to cause divides in our locker rooms?
I think they could be a answer, right? And I do think a lot of that skepticism has been overblown. Going to Big Ten football media days last week and talking to players of, people have said this might be kind of a straw man argument. Is this dividing the locker room? And for the most part, they said no. Is that, there's examples of players that said, when I have a deal, I try to find ways to incorporate my teammates in the deal. Or can I take some of those earnings and then, take the offensive line out to dinner? So I do think the chance that, with Michigan State, over 100 players that have joined this, they're all receiving the same amount. That is a chance to kind of make it more egalitarian. Matt Carrick, the right guard at Michigan State, was telling me that the fact that the walk-ons, right, they're not on scholarship, they have their own out-of-pocket expense, and if they can make, I don't know, $1,000 or a couple grands, like that can go a long way compared to, the future first or second round draft pick that, they may not need $2,000 in the same kind of way immediately compared to the walk-on. So I certainly think that the concerns are overblown, but this is kind of the team unity aspect. Whenever these clubs pop up, we'll see on Twitter that the players who are involved, they'll post the same message where it's, I assume that, Yoke is the one that they create some of this content for social media. And so it's, customized for the school and for the club. And it's very much, it's team first. It's we're all involved together. We're focused on the season. So if nothing else, a chance that for maybe players that don't have any NIL deals so far, just an easy way to say, hey, you know what, I'm part of this. I might be the fourth string whatever, but now I'm part of this club, and that's pretty cool.
Well, the great thing about NIL is that it gives student athletes a chance to be entrepreneurial and to create something for themselves and be business owners. I want to make a little critique about these clubs, these player-led Yoke clubs, that all the websites kind of look the same. They're very similar vibes, language. And again, these access passes are providing very similar things to each individual fan base. What are some ways that you are seeing or that you would like to see these clubs kind of be unique and diversify what they're actually offering?
I think that's a great point, Steph. I've had the same observation where it's like, all right, like I mentioned on Twitter, when a new club pops up, there is that messaging, and it's like, all right, well, the one at Auburn looks pretty similar to the one at Minnesota, which looks pretty similar to the one at Michigan State. And I think that gets back to the scale where CEO Mick Asaf told me that, based on how they've grown the number of clubs, that then decreases the platform fee, bringing the players more revenue. But then the flip side is that, all right, based on their automation and their tech, it does make it maybe pretty turnkey to start a new club and to allow, the next school to join. But then from club to club, they do look similar. So I don't know what, I guess each school to their own respective fan base, that adds the value that, okay, well, still, if I get the chance to potentially meet, my school starting quarterback, or, my school's future, first round defensive end, is it sure if that looks the same, that club looks the same as a different one from a different conference, even if that's true, that may not matter to the fan base. So maybe this is the right way to scale it. Is it all right? They kind of look the same, they feel the same, but as long as Big State U, my alma mater has one, maybe that's all that matters. But I think too is that what Mick was telling me is it's kind of up to the players, right? Of we give them the tools. He was saying we provide the tech, and now it's NIL. It's your name, image, and likeness. So what do you make of it? So I think from club to club, we might see, all right, are there some that are better at it than others? Are there players that take a more hands-on approach, and that this school versus that school might have better events or players who are more engaged? And then one of my biggest questions is, once the season gets kicked off and you're no longer undefeated because your record is no longer 0-0, what happens next? Because I do think that the results of the season really could impact the participation of both the players and the fans who join it, right? Because, Mick was telling me, based on his own college career, he was a former walk-on running back at Notre Dame. Freshman year at Notre Dame, they go 4-8. He called it the worst season in Notre Dame history. I can let someone else argue about what is or isn't the worst season in school history, but that's what he said, right? And then 2 years later, they make the college football playoff for the first time. So, the CEO of this company has personally experienced that, firsthand, of the terrible season, in his words, the worst one in school history, but then also one where they make the playoff. And so I do think that spectrum, where season to season, if this team or any team that has a club, if they have a great season, that surely you would think might have a better result on the club. But also, you hear the phrase a lot right now of keeping the main thing the main thing. Like, go to any media day and you're going to hear 7 players and 2 coaches say that. So what if a school does go 11-1 and they're in the playoff hunt? Are they so focused on football, which obviously that's why they're at that school, in addition to getting their education? Do they then push off NIL to the side, which I think would be understandable, right, if you're in the playoff hunt? But doesn't that decrease the value for the fans? Or if you go 3-9, by October 1st, have the players just tapped out and said, screw this, I'm over it. No more meet and greets for me. So it's almost like, is 9-3 or 8-4 the perfect record to maximize the engagement and the value? Because if you win too, it's weird to say, if you win too much, does that decrease from the player's interest? And then if you lose too much, I mean, obviously that's kind of, self-explanatory.
Well, before we finish that side of the conversation, I want to get a couple more details about these collectives. How are these players marketing and messaging and really getting the word out there? Are they getting good fan engagement from your perspective?
I think so, Steph. It gets back to your last question, because once again, it looks and feels the same from school to school, and then kind of player to player within a single fan base. When you have 105 Michigan State players and they're all promoting on Twitter, you'll see, the club accounts. So the East Lansing NIL club will start retweeting, it feels like 40 tweets in a row, because they're pumped up. They're sharing the announcements from the players. They're thrilled the players are engaged. And so, I think if you're a fan, like, once again, if you have your school colored lenses on your glasses and you're just so pumped up that, hey, I get to meet these players and go to these events, is that, that might be enough, just seeing the flurry of tweets. But once again, they do feel similar. That gets back to the automation of, maybe it is so easy to mass produce, content and messaging for, I'm not sure the exact count, but, they'll be at 15 to 20 clubs pretty soon. So maybe that's why it's easy to say, hey, all right, we'll swatch out this graphic and put in a new club or new school name. But it seems like it's mostly it's Twitter based, maybe some Instagram, very social media heavy, obviously. There are email lists, that you get email updates if you've joined East Lansing NIL club for, the next event. So I mentioned the Zoom call. They blasted that out of, hey, join us at, 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday. We'll have some players there, a couple of giveaways. The giveaways are a huge component, especially on the initial launch of, so Michigan State, they had a signed Kenneth Walker the third jersey, Heisman finalist last season. I think that the Auburn one had maybe a Cam Newton signed football. So once again, kind of like, not that these are NFT based, but kind of like NFTs, there's often kind of that in-person either experience or, memorabilia that's attached to it. Is that, hey, get a chance to win the signed jersey or signed football, and then, come hang out on the Zoom call or come hang out at this in-person event. So very social media heavy, but like you said, it looks and feels similar from school to school. But unless you work in a job like we do, Steph, is that, you may not be tracking, the differences between Minnesota and Michigan State and Auburn and Tennessee.
Absolutely. How are these player-led collectives engaging with the other collectives that are being run by outside organizations, maybe alumni, fans for their schools? Are you seeing any interaction there?
So to this extent, it's non-exclusive. I think that for the most part, the ones that are doing this the right way, which, whatever the heck that means, someone else can parse that. But I do think that non-exclusivity for any sort of deal, right, whether it's a one-off brand deal or it's a collective or a group that says we're not a collective when they are, or whatever, is that non-exclusivity, I think, is a huge deal, right? Because if it's truly about the athletes, is it, if you're hogging all their rights and the athlete didn't have an attorney reviewing that contract, that's really ultimately, it's damaging for them and their earning potential and their brand. So while it is, non-exclusive, I personally have not seen collaboration. That is one of my biggest questions about collectives within one single kind of school ecosystem. We have some schools where they might have, 3 or 4. There was a Virginia Tech merger, I believe 2 weeks ago, that just went through. So they went from, 4 groups down to 3. Because, any more than like 2, honestly, any more than 1 is probably too many, and certainly any more than 2 feels like a lot. If there is not just one, 501c3 and one marketing agency. So I don't know how these will interact with, say, the quote unquote primary collective or primary nonprofit. It seems like most schools, the actual administration and athletic department, they have a primary group that they probably prefer, that they trust the most. They maybe have a former employee that works for them or a main donor that's on the board. So this is a little bit different, where it's not some outside, booster group or donor group. It's funny. Mick Asaf told me, he's like, I think the oldest person on our team at Yoke is like 28. Mick is 24. So this isn't some, 57-year-old donor from Big State U that was a walk-on and is very much involved. Like, this is truly a third party, not, kind of a closely tied group to the school. So I don't know how they interact. I think that once the season kicks off, there's so many questions that we have now in the off season that will be answered, within maybe a month or 2 months.
Absolutely. Well, last nitty gritty question here. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about money. No one wants to talk about money, but we do. There is this profit split. And as you reported, there is about 75% of the earnings go to the players. The rest goes to Yoke. Is that different from the platform fees that you've also reported on? Give me the details there.
It's funny. So this is actually the only one where I know for sure, what the platform fee is. And it's so tough as a reporter because you don't want to ask, there's certain things of, age, weight, income, religion, you just don't ask about. And so I didn't ask when I met with, Matt Carrick, the right guard at Michigan State, but he had just offered up. He's like, yeah, we get 75% in total. And so me, being a great fifth grade math student, I asked, okay, does that mean that Yoke then gets the 25% that you guys don't get? And he said, yeah. And I don't think that, frankly, Yoke loved that was out there. But Matt told me, and I think that's a valuable data point because right now we're hearing a lot of maybe third-hand stories about what certain agents or agencies are taking that's higher than the industry norm. And so I know that 25%, frankly, it raised some eyebrows. And so when I talked to Mick, he'd said that and he's like, we're glad to announce and tell you, since you reported this, is that we're down to 18% for our platform fee. And that was due to the scale that I was talking about. And he was saying that, their hope, if they can get to the single digits, that would be the goal. He said they're optimistic based on as they continue to scale this up and get, non-FBS football clubs. And then, frankly, just non-football clubs, period. Can they expand to volleyball and baseball and basketball and other sports? Could that 18 become 15 and then 12 and then 9 someday? He said, frankly, like any business, he mentioned like a restaurant or like a gas station. there's going to be a certain floor that you can't go lower than that just based on, credit card processing fees and just overhead. But, if this gets to the point where it's 10 versus 25, that's much more in line with industry standards. So, it's one where, because a player offered that up without me asking, I reported that, these companies, they have no obligation, and I'm frankly probably not going to ask just straight up, what are your different platform fees and business models? But I do know that, based on conversations with other groups and companies in the space, whether it's the Players Lounge or Fan Pass U, which operates a Nebraska club, is that 25% to them, frankly, felt high. So you can maybe do some inferencing there, and you probably guess they take a lower cut, a lower platform fee than 25%. But it's one where it's kind of that, like you said, is that people are scared to talk about money. And there's certain ways that, it's kind of uncomfortable. And frankly, it's none of my business to know exactly what someone's getting. But I do think there was value in sharing that, hey, if this club or this club network is going to get so big, 25% feels really high. And the fact that it's decreasing is probably a win for the athletes.
It's interesting that you're saying all of this because we're seeing now some of these big marketplaces, Open Doors Influencer, coming out and saying, well, no, we do want to track the deals. We do want to track the money. Oliver Luck's new, NIL information education centers, creating this database with Arizona State. I think that there is a hunger for transparency when it comes to some of these numbers. Agree that we don't need to know totally like names and salaries, but the industry right now, we're going into year 2. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of question marks, and you do a great job of giving us, trying to cut between the noise. I want to circle back and end with our conversation about wins and losses and how NIL, is it just going to come down to, is this program successful or not? When it comes to these collectives, when it comes to any NIL deals, what do you see for year 2? Are we going to see a little bit of a, market stabilization with some of these big crazy numbers that are floated out there? Are we going to see maybe a decline in collectives as donors maybe get turned off when their team goes 0-10? What do you think, Andy?
I do think there will be some sort of consolidation. So I just mentioned, 2 Virginia Tech groups. They were very adamant that they are not a collective. Once again, catch-all term at this point. I almost don't care. Like, let's just call them all collectives, and you guys can sort out, what you are or aren't. But 2 of their groups are collectives or marketing agencies merged, and so we're seeing, the consolidation in that way. I believe last week, Altius Sports Partners, they announced this new program where there'll be 6 schools that have kind of an in-house general manager for NIL. So at schools such as, Cincinnati and LSU and Northwestern, that's one where it's almost like, whether it's like a Learfield or these other like third-party major companies where they might have someone that's kind of on campus and not part of the department, but sort of like there's certain, especially with state laws now with NIL, is that if it's a third party, can they answer questions and be a resource that the assistant athletic director for whatever, can't answer, frankly. So I do think in those ways, a consolidation, whether it's inside the school, outside the school, there will be some sort of streamlined process. Like I mentioned, is that I think most schools, they want to have one collective they trust. They know the people behind it. They know the money. They don't want 4 and having some sort of, pick a Texas, a Tennessee, and Auburn, whoever that has not had the football success that they want and expect. And maybe not literally in this way, but kind of figuratively, of if there's too many cooks in the kitchen, that can be a bad thing. So I do think that's one. I do think some of the major brands is that, sure, there's the occasional one-off Gatorade, Adidas, Nike deals, but they were super slow to enter the market, which I don't think was surprising. Is a lot more of, the local pizza joint or a local car dealership. Is that what we see more of these, Fortune 500 major, especially in the, the athletic wear space or energy drink, more of these companies that kind of align with what athletes, their personal brands and what they do. Will we see them get more involved in year 2 after having, more data, especially from, if this NIL education and information center database proves to be effective in a larger swath of the market? Will we see more Gatorade deals and Adidas and Nikes of the world? And then frankly, just, the economy writ large of, if the economy takes a downturn, will we see marketing budgets get slashed? Like that might be one of the first things to go if there is a downturn, which, no one wants for numerous reasons. But does that kind of impact year 2? And does that, like you mentioned, between, is there an economic downturn? And then if a lot of these preseason top 25 teams that will be announced here, the first AP poll, when they go 2-2 through September, do we see donors? Do they say, hey, funds are going to dry up, or we're already focused on the transfer portal, and then it's the inducement pay for play question of, all right, do players start entering and looking for deals, or agents reach out on their behalf? So I think the consolidation, and then where the heck does the money come from or not come from if a team starts losing? I think that's a huge question that has to be answered.
There is so much going on in the NIL landscape, although, as we were just saying, there are some set models here that people are following. I know that we're going to keep following your reporting, Andy. Thank you so much for all that you do with On3, all that you do with your avid FOIA-ing and all of that. We very much look forward to following along with this crazy landscape and seeing how it all plays out in year 2. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Steph. Anytime.